public hearings that are going to take quite a bit of time. We have some other business that won't take very long, but rather than save that for the end and keep a few people waiting, we're going to move to, we're going to go to 3, 1 through 7, and then we'll go to 5, 1, and 2. Judy, do you have any business?
No comments tonight, Your Honor.
Okay. Roll call.
Mayor Peterson.
Thank you.
Councilman Thurley.
Here.
Craig.
Here.
Alexander. Here. Iden. Here. Borzakowski.
Here.
Double.
Here.
Under the petitions, requests, and communications, item 3.1 is the sign and banner schedule for the first half of the year. And these are signs and banners that are on the city parkways at Wyndham Park, Huff and Highway 61, and the banners over Mankato Avenue.
Move to approve the request.
Second.
Motion by George, second by Michelle. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Item 3.2 is a request for the St. Martin's Strawberry Festival in Sinclair Park on Sunday, June 9th. Move to approve that request.
Moved by Michelle.
I'll second.
Second by Pam. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Item 3.3 is a request to expand the licensed premises for Ed's No Name Bar.
Move to approve the request.
Motion by Jerry.
I second.
Second by Pam. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Item 3.4 is a sign request by the Rockwell Kent Festival Committee. And this is for a sign at Wyndham Park, January 28th through February 11th. I move to approve that request.
Moved by Michelle.
Second.
Second by George. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Item 3.5 is a request for a temporary on-sale wine and malt liquor license for the Winona Area Catholic Schools for an event to be held at the St. Stan School on February 23rd.
Move to approve that request.
Second.
Moved by George, seconded by Paul. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed.
Item 3.6 is the Theater du Mississippi lease agreement for the use of the Masonic Temple for 1 year, and the 2013 draft agreement was sent to the council on Friday. And Chad is here if you have questions.
I'll move to approve that request.
Motion to approve by Michelle,
I would second that.
second by Pam. Any discussion? Questions for staff? If not, we'll move to vote. All those in favor? George?
Could Chad just briefly just touch on this a little bit? Anything different or?
Mayor and Council, this lease agreement would allow Theater to Mississippi to lease and use space on the 3rd floor of the Masonic Temple. They have been leasing this space for the previous 2 years. So we'd be entering into our 3rd lease agreement with TDM. We feel this is a benefit to have the Masonic Temple used in this fashion. One, it generates income for the city. We have a citizen group then in the property. They do, of course, host events and workshops at the property. Again, we feel it promotes tourism with their events, and then again, it gives us a clearer focus for the future of the property. So we're recommending that we enter into this lease agreement again for a period of 1 year.
Other questions? Proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Item 3.7 is a police department request for no parking on 3rd Street by the exit of the LEC building.
Move to introduce the attached ordinance. Second.
Moved by Jerry, seconded by Al. Comments? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Under new business, item 5.1 is to award the contract for the Westfield Water Treatment Plant improvements to Gritter Construction with a bid of $190,948. The engineer's estimate was $260,000.
Move to approve the bid for the Westfield Water Treatment Plant improvements.
Motion by George,
Second.
second by Michelle. Discussion?
I
Al?
just have a question. Can staff answer any questions about the low bidder, Gritter Construction, as far as whether they've done this kind of, I'm assuming since they're a qualified bidder they have, but just wondering if they've ever done any work for the city in the past. And no one can. Keith isn't here? Okay. No.
Councilmember Thurley, I don't believe that they've done any work in previous years for the city of Winona, but I know that they were a qualified bidder as part of the process, and that everything's been reviewed.
Okay, okay. Just have a new bidder. I think going through the process, we should really make sure everything is as it was proposed to be and built that way. Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll move to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
And item 5.2 is the pay equity implementation report. And Myrna is here if you have questions.
Could she just give us a briefing on this?
Could she? You're asking her to?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sure.
Mayor and Council, this is a report that the state requires us to do every 3 years. It has to just to show that we are in compliance with the pay equity laws, and this report does show that we are in compliance. It goes to show that the essential main function of it is to show that females are paid equitable to males. Any specific questions?
This is once every 3 years?
3 years.
I have a question. Myrna, in this report, are there any adjustments that need to be made in the compensation level?
No, as you see on the graph that was included in your packet, the line is if it was a perfect world, and we are very close to the line, and we've always been very close to total compliance, but we are in compliance.
I realize that. I wanted to ask the question.
Yes.
Make sure. Thank you.
Jerry?
Myrna, I appreciate the work you've done on this, and I also appreciate your last statement, which will probably be used at the bargaining table for years to come, when you just testified that pretty much in a perfect world here, so we'll use that in the future.
Any other
Any other
comments?
questions?
Questions? Is there a motion?
I would move to accept the report.
Moved by Pam. Second. Seconded by Paul. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carried.
Now we will go to the public hearings. The first hearing is item 2.1, the sand moratorium ordinance amendments. And staff will begin with a brief report. And then I do have the first sheet of the sign-in, and if there are additional people who would like to speak who haven't signed in, there's another sheet if you could please sign in with your name and print your address.
Okay. I have a brief statement I'd like to read. The public hearing this evening is to take public comment on 4 ordinances under consideration by the City Council, including the following: amendments to the mining ordinance, 2, amendments to the performance standards ordinance regarding moisture testing levels for sand stockpiles, 3, amendments to the existing sand conditional use permit ordinance establishing setback requirements from residential property, and 4, an ordinance establishing transportation impact analysis and road wear agreement requirements. The order of business for this public hearing will be as follows. The public hearing portion of the meeting will be declared open, followed by city staff, who will then present its report to the public and council. The council will then hear comments from the public in attendance. Those wishing to speak, as Monica already said, should sign up on the list. I will call upon those wishing to speak in the order listed on the sign-up sheet. Speakers will be limited to 2 minutes so that everyone wishing to speak has an opportunity to do so. The city clerk will time the speakers and notify speakers when their time is set to expire and has expired. Speakers should speak to the specific ordinances before the council this evening and should not repeat comments that have already been made by other speakers, if possible. Speakers will be respectful of others, and the audience will be respectful of all speakers. The audience will refrain at all times from audible public comments, including clapping, during or following any speakers. If there are disruptions from the audience or from speakers, any person disrupting these proceedings will be asked to leave. Following receipt of public comments, the public hearing portion of the meeting will be closed. Thereafter, council may ask further questions of staff or make any applicable motions. Are there any questions from council regarding the order of the procedures for this public hearing? Hearing none, I'll declare the public hearing open. No?
That's
Sorry.
a very good format. It's well said.
All right. Now I'll declare the public hearing open and let Carlos start.
Evening, Mayor and Council. As you discussed here, the public hearing tonight is on 4 action items that are in front of the council. These action items were discussed at a pre-council meeting on January 6th. Those 4 having to do again with moisture mining ordinance amendments, moisture testing, setback residential to residential properties, transportation impact analyses, and that's the final one. These items are the result of a sand moratorium study that was guided by the Planning Commission over the past year here. Staff recommends holding a singular public hearing on all of the action items as was described by the Mayor, and then consider each for adoption individually. The Planning Commission followed the same approach, resulting in 4 separate votes. The first vote for the mining ordinance amendments was 6-0 in favor. The second for moisture testing was 5-1 in favor. The third for setbacks residential was 6-0, and the final for the transportation impact analysis was 5-1. For each action item then, there are a number of options in front of council for tonight. You could either approve the item. Under this option, council would move to adopt the ordinance representing each action item. You could modify the item, and under this action, council would move to approve the modifications to the item and then move to adopt the ordinance with the approved modifications. You could also deny the item or table the item, and under this action, staff could answer further questions about the item and reintroduce it at a later council meeting, that being the first council meeting in February. That's all that I have for the public hearing.
I have a question.
Question from
If we were to deny an item, what would that do? We can't really deny it, can we? What happens to it then?
If you were to deny an item, it would not be added to the city code, and that's basically what would happen.
Okay, so we'll stop there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
any other city staff wish to speak? Okay. Well, before I open this to the public, I just want to say that a big thank you to the Planning Commission for all their work they've put in the last year, to the volunteers that have served on that commission, to the city staff that have worked hard on this issue, to the members of CASM, to all the members of the public that have shown up at all these numerous meetings and have taken the time to comment and voice their opinion. It's all been very important and appreciated. It hasn't always been easy, but it's all part of the process. And with that, I'll open this up for public comment. Is there anybody here that would like to speak to the issue? And I know there is, so I guess I can call on the first person. First person to sign up is Margaret Walsh. Please step to the podium, identify yourself, give your address, and remember it's 2 minutes.
My name is Margaret Walsh. I live at 1114 West Broadway here in Winona. The Minnesota Department of Health is clear about silica sand being a respiratory threat. It is uncrushable, lodges in the lungs, and proceeds to the bloodstream where it can further damage the body. I am concerned about the harmful air quality that a frac sand transportation facility can cause in our valley. There are 1,500 people per square mile in Winona. The high-density living areas for people are within the traffic patterns of the CD Corporation's operations. The air quality baseline being passed off by some of you is not adequate. Students monitoring the polluted air of the city garage is not an acceptable baseline. The Minnesota Department of Health offers municipalities assistance, training, and grant money avenues to do a health impact assessment. Most of these studies in Minnesota cities were done on already existing transportation facilities. It would be negligent on your part to ignore all this valuable help and move forward with a silly baseline that measured the air quality of the home of our city equipment and not the places where the people live. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Colette Hyman.
Thank you very much. My name is Colette Hyman. I live at 472 West Broadway. I've been teaching at Winona State University since 1990. And year in and year out, I have heard from students that they choose to come to Winona State because of the beauty of the area and its safety and healthfulness. They come here and their parents send them here because of the quality of life that Winona offers. Frac sand mining is a grave threat to this quality of life, and I don't see that the sand ordinance study conducted by the city adequately or comprehensively addressed the threat that silica sand mining poses to the quality of life in Winona. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Joe Morris.
Thank you. My address is 23375 Buffalo Ridge Road. It's up in Wilson Township. I come to Winona almost every day, so whatever happens in Winona affects me, even though I don't live in the city. I think that this study that's been done is quite deficient. I want to comment on two pieces of it. One is the setbacks to residences, and one is the transportation, but also some other items. I was here for several meetings, but I was here for the two meetings which focused on quality of life. And what I recall is that the Planning Commission didn't even define what quality of life is in Winona. They talked about it a little bit and decided they couldn't define it. The things that they focused on was the truck traffic and the setbacks from residences. The setbacks would be 200 feet. I don't think that's enough, and also the siting of frac sand facilities and mines. But there was no discussion in the quality of life about arts events, music, film, plays that would happen in Winona. There was no discussion about the effect on the tourism, the quiet of our valley in the evenings, as people like to enjoy the quiet without a lot of truck traffic, bicycling on city streets, enjoying the historic buildings, and people coming here to look at the historic areas of the city. None of that was even discussed or thought about in the quality of life section. And the truck routes that are being talked about, they're not defined anywhere. So what does that say? I can't, what's that? 30 seconds. All right, thank you. And so the one other thing that I just wanted to bring up was about the bluffland protection. We argued long and hard in the city here about protecting our bluffs, but there's nothing that addresses that in this ordinance. And in one section it said that it's unlikely that there would be mining in the bluff impact overlay because the costs are too high to reach the product. I'm sorry, but that's not a good reason not to study how to protect the bluffs with this. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Next speaker, Chris Meyer.
My name is Chris Meyer. I live at 480 West Burns Valley Road. When I first heard the complaints about sand dust from frac sand mining, I discounted the issue. After all, we all had a sandbox as children, so how serious could this be? But the sand which is mined for our use in hydrofracking is not the same thing at all. This is spherically shaped, high purity silica sand, which represents a hazard when it becomes airborne and is inhaled. I have here an OSHA fact sheet. It describes the effects of crystalline silica exposure. It is a human carcinogen. When you breathe it, it embeds itself in your lungs, it causes scar tissue to form, and inhibits your ability to breathe. This is called silicosis. As a result, OSHA has established permissible exposure limits for workers, and it requires communication and training for workers who will be exposed to silica. I also have a hazard alert from OSHA and NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, stated June of 2012, and it relates to the airborne exposure of workers to silica in hydrofracking operations. Silica is thrown into the air as it moves along transfer belts, into hoppers, and through various ports of the process. The results of NIOSH field studies at various hydrofracking locations in the U.S. showed that out-of-doors workers, and even those upwind and not in the immediate area of sand movers, had exposures above the NIOSH recommended levels. In fact, even truck drivers in the cabs of their truck without a filtration system had exposure above levels. NIOSH recommends monitoring of the air and implementing best practices to trap and reduce dust and, when needed, respiratory protection. I have become convinced that silica sand dust is dangerous when it's inhaled. At a minimum, sand processing facilities in Winona need to perform air quality testing to know that we at least meet the OSHA and NIOSH standards. Testing humidity levels inside the piles of silica is not sufficient, nor is allowing facilities 200 feet from a residential property offering sufficient protection for Winona residents. We also need to address who and how Winona will enforce air quality standards at the facilities.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Jeff Falk.
Jeff Falk, Fountain City. I'd like to encourage the council to ask a couple questions of the staff after this public hearing. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency says there has been no research on off-site air quality effects. Therefore, referring to the MPCA as evidence for a standard is silly because they have nothing to base it on. Ask why the moisture testing, and if there is moisture testing, what evidence is there that it works? Okay. Secondly, the traffic analysis never addresses issues of air quality produced by diesel trucks. I've seen a report from the San Francisco Health Department that a heavy-duty diesel truck, in terms of particulate pollution, is the equivalent of 22 regular vehicles. 22 regular vehicles, I should say about 450 round trips by a heavy-duty diesel truck is therefore close to equivalent to 10,000 regular vehicles. Their recommendation is that the air quality could be affected with 10,000 vehicles within 50 meters of the center line of the street. 50 meters is about 150 feet. Okay. So another question is, why does the ordinance not address air quality due to diesel traffic? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Steve Schild.
Good evening. My name is Steve Schild. I live at 1282 West Broadway. I don't think that the research done so far has gone far enough, but I say that based not on my opinion, but on information I got last week from a Mayo Clinic physician and a University of Wisconsin-Madison economist. The physician, his name is Fyerson. He's on the internal medicine staff at Mayo, and he talked about what he saw as the unanswered questions or the threats, the health hazards that exist as a result of exposure to silica sand and to diesel soot and diesel fumes. His concern, he said, is based on either the lack of existence of standards or standards that are imprecisely applied. After he was done talking, I asked him a question I've had all along. I said, people say all the time that this frack industry can be done safely if we follow the existing regulations. I said, do you think that's true? And he said, based on the standards that exist and do not exist, he said, it is absolutely not true. All right, he said, in response to a question, why don't we have the necessary regulations? He said, because mining has never been done at the volume it's being done at today. That is to say, in his estimation, we are flying blind here. We simply don't have the information that we need. He said it would be nice if the state would do a moratorium to study the effect of diesel, all right, and the impact of the sand. To be real quick, the economist, he said that mining is inherently unstable. He said that the negative effects that results from a mine when the mine closes down, and they all will close down, are always worse than the positive effects that exist when they were there. He said that job creation in mining is stagnant because of the role of mechanization that does work that computers used to. And the last thing I would like to say real quickly is to go back to something that Karen Sonneman said more than 2 years ago, which was we need a regional study to look at the cumulative effects that this industry could have on our area. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jane Cogill.
Jane Cogill, 317 Walnut Street. I would have made many of the points that have already been made, but another one that's important to me is to know about property values. This is something that nobody seems to be paying any attention to, that if we turn our town into some gigantic hub with thousands and thousands, literally, of trucks coming through here every day, what is going to happen to those of us who have properties in the town and when nobody wants to come visit here anymore or live here anymore? Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like
Shelba Halsing?
Shelba Halsing? Sheba. I was going to say that, but I didn't quite look like a B. I'm sorry.
Sheba Halsing, 425 West Mark, Winona, Minnesota. Winona Mayor, City Council members, and City Manager. The Will Dilg chapter of the Isaac Walton League of America requests that the City Council not approve the Planning Commission report and extend the city's moratorium until all the questions regarding the health and safety of our citizens are answered and fully understood from a long-term standpoint. We and many others still do not understand how or why the city port was exempted from Winona's moratorium. Winona is the city where the conservationists came together in the 1920s to help create the Isaac Walton League and protect the natural resources of the upper Mississippi River. We have to thank the dedicated efforts of conservation visionaries like Winona Grosher and philanthropist John Latchin, the founder and first president of the Isaac Walton League, Will Dilg, for their efforts to preserve the beauty and integrity of today's river and bluffland environment. These precious resources of land, water, and clean air are worth more in economic terms today and in the future than any proposed resource extraction, exploitation, and export for quick profit. It is our responsibility to remember and honor this legacy. I believe it would be irresponsible to move forward without weighing the consequences. I propose the formation of an environmental impact committee utilizing our academic resources at the 2 local universities. Winona County and surrounding areas are not only beautiful, but also ecologically diverse. Visitors come here to enjoy our natural resources, and it would be a shame to threaten their viability. There are issues that we feel need to be further assessed and studied. Now is when our City Council can act to demonstrate its integrity and commitment to upholding the best interests of our citizens of the Winona community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ray Drudzki.
Thank you. Ray Dretzky, 355 West 4th. I remember back to the Winona Middle School meeting last spring that you held, thank you for that, where the state's top toxicologist, when asked about the silicosis factor, made mention that, of course, there have been no studies about airborne particles far enough away from the workplace, but that silicosis is one of the top occupational death causers in the United States. And when asked, should we be concerned without a study in moving forward, his response was, yes, I would be very concerned. That's the state's top toxicologist. At that same meeting was the regulators for the state. And when asked, how will we police this to make sure that people are falling within the rules? Because gosh, when there's so much money at stake, people tend to slide a little bit here and there. They said we have no ability to enforce this. It would come down to local people to enforce this, which means, because you also don't have the resources to hire people to enforce this, it comes down to us as citizens to pay attention and watch that. I was shocked by those two answers, because what happened then was we just moved forward, and now we're doing this, and now we're doing this, and gosh, let's just keep moving forward. And then what surprises me is, even before we really get out of the chutes here, we're looking at permits who are asking, can we double the number of trucks per day? Can we put less moisture in the sand? I'd like to leave you with a thought that I think if we lived in Lacaparo Valley with hundreds of miles of flat corn land, we probably should be having these kind of conversations, because we wouldn't have much else to lay our hat on. But look where we live. We could do more in tourism that would be more sustainable and long-term benefit than what we're doing here. The toothpaste is almost out of this tube. Once it's out, there's no way to get it back in. And we've killed one of the most beautiful areas of the region to all the tourist benefit and impact that that could bring, which is long-term and sustainable. And much better for everyone's quality of life. Let's not quibble over these small issues. Let's take Vermont's stance and just ban it altogether. The whole state just said, no, we're not going to do that.
Well, thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Doug Nopar.
I'm Doug Nopar, 29440 County Road 17, Winona. I also work at the Land Stewardship Project in Lewiston. I urge you to send all four of these items back for more work. I know that your job is to focus on protecting the quality of life in Winona, but I want you to be aware of what may be coming in your direction from abroad. The handout, one side is a map of western Wisconsin. It shows the 100 frac sand mines and processing facilities which have been established in the many of which have been established in the last 2 years, most of which are within 60 to 75 miles of Winona. On the back is a second map that shows 4 mines being discussed in Saratoga Township in Winona County, 3 in Pilot Mountain Township in Fillmore County, just over the Winona County border, and a list of 5 mines being discussed for northern Houston County. 12 mines, all with sand destined for the closest processing and shipping center, which is Winona. How many trucks? According to the Rochester Post-Bulletin, just the first 2 mines in Saratoga Township, Dobbelstein and Yoder, could each mine up to 2 million tons of sand annually for 20 years. That would require 300 trucks each mine per day, 6 days per week. And then the article adds, quote, that could double in some circumstances. That's 2 mines, okay? I just mentioned 12. Houston County, the Tostenson Mine, the Johnson Mine, the Chapel Van Gundy Mine, the Porteous Olson Mine, and the Erickson Mine near Rushford. The last comment I'd like to make is there's been a real gulf between citizens concerned about this issue and city staff. We can all point fingers at one another. This really needs to be resolved in a way where we're all listening to each other and respecting each other's point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg Gout.
I'm Greg Gout, 673 East Wabasha in the beautiful 4th Ward of Winona. I'd like to say something about the comprehensive plan. The ordinances that you have before you are all based ultimately on a reading of the comprehensive plan, which, by the way, is this book, which I'm sure is dear to all of you. It certainly is a very good book. It's beautifully illustrated, and it's full of a great deal of wisdom. Way to go, Al. I really appreciate that. You all should have it close at hand. I hope you do. The report says that the ordinances et cetera, are essentially based on a reading of the plan. It says that the plan, quote, indicates support for commodity processing and transportation activities such as frac sand. I think that that's quite a stretch. And in fact, the report goes on to say that frac sand is nowhere mentioned in the comprehensive plan. And as I page through the comprehensive plan, I don't find any mention of mining being part of Winona's plan for the future in any way whatsoever. However, if you look at the economic development section of the plan, which I think is the key section for what we're talking about today on page 37, you'll find a list of very concrete priorities of what this city council decided should be the economic development plan for the future in Winona. You won't find anything about mining there, you won't find anything about frac sand, you'll see the things about developing recreational and cultural amenities, support for the composite materials cluster, talked about a conference center, a performing arts center downtown, those kind of things, and essentially the development of tourism, as Ray Dretzky was talking about. That's all in the plan. So I don't think it's really fair to say that the plan indicates support for frac sanding. And besides that, the report doesn't really address how the development of more of a frac sand hub in Winona would affect the actual priorities that this city council agreed to when they passed the comprehensive plan earlier. Thank you.
Thank you. Della Schmidt.
Good evening, Mayor Peterson, City Council members, City staff. My name is Della Schmidt. I'm President of the Winona Area Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the Winona Area Chamber of Commerce, thank you for the due diligence that City staff, Planning Commission, and City Council members have applied yourselves to over the course of this important community discussion these many, many months. Regarding the industrial sand ordinance and the moratorium that has been in place. This has been, we believe, a comprehensive and a complete process, and we thank you for that. All business owners desire basically the same thing, to be good community citizens while exercising the right and opportunity to pursue their business interests. Tonight, we encourage you to put into place the recommendations from the Planning Commission, and by doing so, allow those with a business interest to proceed while creating more jobs. We ask for your vote to adopt as presented and prepared all 4 of the ordinances before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Kent Cogill.
Kent Cogill, 317 Walnut, Winona. Thank you for hearing all of our voices, most of which have expressed concerns that I had and won't need to detail now. Health concerns, environmental concerns, and certainly even economic concerns. I think the things that have not been thoroughly studied, such as what Professor Hyman mentioned about the impact on people who come to Winona State, in some part at least because of the beauty of the area, these need a lot more study. What I'm going to do very briefly is speak for Ron Stevens, who lives on Kansas Street and tried to be here tonight but had a death of a close friend and was not able to come. So I'm a little inexperienced here, but he showed me and asked me to bring up satellite photos of the eastern part of the United States, night photos taken very recently, which show illumination in the middle of North Dakota, roughly the size of the illumination for Chicago and only slightly less bright. These are frac oil fields, and it's the burning off of the natural gas. About 30% of the natural gas is just being wasted. It's being burned off. It's hard for me to think that we need to jump into more production of sand and oil that would, or using the sand for oil production, given this kind of waste. In short, I think we need an extension of the moratorium. And it's dispiriting that so many eloquent voices have spoken for a year, and yet the vote on the Planning Commission was 606055151. It seems to me that these voices are not being sufficiently heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marie Cavesi.
Good evening, council members, mayor, city staff. Thank you for your time this evening and for listening to all of these comments. By my rough draft just now, there's been one speaker in favor of passing the package as it stands, and many other people speaking with reservations, serious reservations. I stand on the side of the reservations. I monitored most of the Planning Commission meetings and understand and saw the diligence which the discussions were held, but I also saw that citizen input was not highly regarded in those meetings. There was no follow-up discussion or very little. I would ask that the moratorium be extended. I feel that the 4 recommendations are inadequate and incomplete. There are many loopholes in the recommendations as they stand. For instance, the traffic impact analysis is only taking place for trucking off of city truck routes. So that's a huge loophole. It was never explained how that aspect would be implemented. If you have 200 trucks at the time you apply for your CUP, then you have a traffic impact analysis. If you have only 50, but later you gain over 200, do you then go back and reconsider that CUP in order to do a traffic analysis? It's just kind of loose. And there were many other parts of the recommendations that had those kind of loopholes. There are serious issues for health, for environmentalism, for quality of life, and for the safety and welfare of the community. And that is your charge as city council members, so I would ask you to do your due diligence and to send this back for further discussion, for further study. There are many issues not included in this report. There's no economic impact study for jobs. We're told that it will create jobs. We have no idea what kind, how many, what are they sustainable? We don't know if they'll take away jobs from tourism industry. We don't know a lot about this. So I'd ask that citizens be included in a meaningful way in the further process for this planning report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other citizens who'd like to speak? Please come to the podium, state your name and address.
It's too low for me. My name is Joseph Mulkey. My address is 415 Wilsey Street in Winona. And I just have a couple questions for the city council and city staff. I would like to know if there is a plan in place to enforce the regulations, and if the city staff, if there's current city staff to do that, and if there is not, if the city has funding to hire new staff to enforce these new regulations on the frack industry. I'd also like to thank the city staff for and the city council for the moratorium to study this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Could you repeat your last name?
It's Mulkey, M-U-L-K-E-Y.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak to the issue? I'll ask one more time. Anybody else wish to speak to the issue? Hearing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed, and we will let the council talk. We will deal with this in one amendment at a time. The first amendment has to do with the mining ordinance. Anybody wish to speak? George?
I just want to make one comment. It was brought up by a couple of folks tonight The issue tonight is not about extending the moratorium. It's about these conditions that the sand moratorium amendments that we'll be voting on. Nothing to do with extending the moratorium. That comes at a later date, so just to have that clear.
All right.
Mayor Pearson, is this when we can ask questions, or do you want us to?
You can ask questions, sure.
Can I ask for some clarification, please? Correct me if I'm wrong, but this ordinance does allow the bluff land protection. It does not override that. This adheres to what the bluff land protection says, correct? I just want to clarify that because there seemed to be some concern that, I'm sorry, I'm sick, I'm trying to speak up. But maybe you can repeat that, but the bluff land ordinance.
Michelle's question was if the ordinance follows the bluff land impact overlay, which would prohibit any kind of land disturbance in the bluffs, and it does. So the proposed ordinance says that mining can occur outside of those areas that have been protected by our bluff land protection ordinance. Those areas being the bluff land areas that were studied for a couple of years and the amendments that were made to our code to protect those areas.
Many people in the audience tonight asked about the moratorium and the possibility of extending this moratorium. I'd like to ask our city attorney to comment on that.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the state statute guides how moratoriums are done and if they can be extended. There are specific conditions as stated in statute that dictate whether or not a moratorium can be extended. In reviewing that statute, basically the only mechanisms to extend the moratorium beyond its current expiration, which is March 13th, I believe, of 2013, is that there would have to be some either federal or state ongoing issue that was related to Winona that we were waiting on in order to move forward. And in that case, the moratorium could only be extended 120 days. In looking at that factually, I don't see that that provision of the statute applies. The only other mechanism to extend a moratorium is if the city has not adopted a comprehensive plan. As was pointed out earlier, we have adopted a comprehensive plan. So that basis also does not exist for the city to extend a moratorium. My read of the statute is that the only way that you can extend it is by those statutory mechanisms. I don't see that they exist under the facts and circumstances presented here, so I don't believe that the moratorium can be extended.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
I'd like to talk about the mining ordinance, and it kind of surprises me that it's even possible to have mines inside the city limits after the city limits are drawn, and I am really kind of very much opposed to that. I would suggest, though, we change the ordinance in order to limit further mining inside the city. I would suggest that we change this ordinance to increase the setbacks from residential property. Right now, I believe they read at 1,000 feet. Okay, I would suggest we change that to 2,000 feet, and that would be a residential buffer. So between any given new mine and a residential area, 2,000 feet. But in regard to the setbacks, I'd like to understand a little bit more about an apparent contradiction. I'm not sure if I'm reading it properly. There's in paragraph 2 on page, I guess it's page 1 of our mining ordinance, it says that no part of an extraction operation will be located within 1,000 feet of a residential district. And then down there under extraction pits, it refers to a figure of no part of an extraction operation will be conducted closer than 500 feet. And then further down it said, provided this distance may be reduced to 25 feet by written consent of the current owner of the abutting property. What do those different numbers mean?
The difference between those numbers are, the first one is 1,000 feet of a residential district.
The second one about not any closer than 500 feet to a residential or commercial structure. Those are residential or commercial structures which may be in zones that are other than residential zoning districts. So you can't have a mine closer than 500 feet in a closer than 500 feet to a residential or commercial structure in a industrial zone or a business zone. The primary setback would be that 1,000-foot setback to residential zoning districts. So that's the differentiation between the two. On one hand, you're looking at districts. The other ones, you're looking at structures to cover potential structures that are not in the residential zoning district.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'm more concerned about the people involved. So I would say 1,000 feet for all of those, or 2,000 feet for all of those. I'd like to change, is that okay? Okay, paragraph number 2, just change it to 2,000 feet. That's not going to affect Bison's in any way. It's going to affect the future of open pit mines within the city limits of Winona. I also have another suggestion, and that's on the second page, under paragraph 7. We have hours of operations for all mines. The way it reads now, it says, shall be between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. I don't know how that got changed from 9 p.m., but I would object to that. That's too late. So 9 p.m. would be the latest.
Other council comments?
Procedurally, Mayor, we don't have a motion on the floor. Councilperson Iden is making amendments to the motion that's
I think she's just stating what she would like to see.
Well,
so what would I do first? I'm new.
Well, we'd have to have an amendment on the floor to talk about this, or a motion rather, to talk about action item 1, the mining ordinance amendment. So that has to be on the floor.
Jerry?
At this point, I know that's procedurally correct, but I think this whole evening is a little bit different to begin with. And I like the fact that we're having a discussion first before we get into something, but I don't like having the clock working against us on this particular one. Over the last couple of days, I've heard a couple of rather disturbing things that, you know, the Planning Commission, and they did a marvelous job on this, whether you agree with them or not, they had a thankless job. And some feel that, you know, hey, we just dumped it on them, and, you know, they're volunteers and they spent a lot of extra time and it wasn't easy and we may not like what they came back with, but nobody can disagree with the amount of effort they put into it. Because of that effort, who are we to say no to it? I mean, we can't do that. Well, yeah, we can, respectfully. We've had staff members that have been putting in full time on this. We have some of these people who have put in full time on this, pretty close. We've had the Planning Commission spending a lot of time with us, and all of us. Yet, and please don't take any offense at this, but other than Councilwoman Iden, she's been involved in this for a long time, but we do have 3 new members. You have been involved in it very much. Having a discussion, and then maybe with some specific items, bringing it back in a period of time is not the worst thing in the world.
You mean tabling it?
Well, I don't want to use that word because once we say that word, then we cannot discuss it.
But I meant afterwards.
Afterwards, well, you can either do that or just, yeah, you could table and say, well, one thing I don't think any of us want tonight is tabling it just for the sake of tabling it. We table it and give staff, and not just the Planning Commission, I think they've done a fine job. I think then it's up to staff and ourselves and some people from the audience to work together to, if that's where we go with it tonight, I'm just throwing out some ideas. Give a specific date to bring it back and some pretty general things, specific if possible, but general things that we want them to work on. Just say, majority doesn't like it, bring it back. Well, that's not helping. That is an option for this evening. Once we get into a motion, that is voted up or down. So just putting it out there. And we won't know what some of the specifics are until we talk about them. So
I'm gonna at least agree with Pam that currently I don't think any of us would be in favor of additional mining in city limits. So I don't really have a problem with extra space between residents and an extraction or blasting mine. I think that's common sense. Just to comment on what you were saying.
Councilman Thurley?
I have a question of staff, Carlos. You know, these action items 1 through 4, what if nothing happens on any of them between now and the end of the moratorium on March 13th?
Give me 1 second here.
In other words, if we don't have any rules in place by the end of the moratorium, what happens?
So the existing regulations that we do have in City Code right now are what's up on the screen. So if nothing happened with these action items, the existing regulations that would apply to sand operations are up on the screen. We currently have a conditional use permit requirement for all sand processing and transportation facilities. There is currently a CUP required for extraction or for mining. Site plans are always also required, so in addition to the CUP, we would also ask for a site plan. Performance standards that are in the city's zoning code apply to each one of the sites. In addition, the city has the ability to designate specific truck routes. The state also has oversight in terms of air, water, and environmental review.
Thank you, Carlos. I guess, you know, my point was in combination with what our city attorney said about how the moratorium works, and it does have a finite ending date. So what the Planning Commission has given us is literally a document and a series of documents that help us to address these issues with public input. And we have until March 13th basically to do that. I just want to remind that, yes, we all would probably not like to have a mine in our community, but we have to have regulations. And with public input and the input of our Planning Commission and this council, we can hopefully make a good decision that's going to benefit our health and welfare into the future and allow an industry to proceed. And that's the conclusion of my remarks at this time.
Paul?
I think it's highly unrealistic to look at the idea that there would be a second mine in the city of Winona. I think that's dreamland that would ever happen. But you will not stop the mine that is in because it's grandfathered in. So I think that, and the inference that a second mine may evolve I think is just a false premise. Because I don't think this council or the Planning Commission would approve a second mine started from scratch. George?
Let's remember the mine, the Bison's property that we're talking about, came into the city through the annexation process. Otherwise, if it was still Winona Township, and Paul can speak for that, we wouldn't even be here tonight. But maybe when it was annexed, maybe that portion should not have come into the city. But that's the reason. It never was. If we keep talking mines within the city, it's on the outskirts of the city, but it was the next in. We always did not have that, if we want to say, within the city of Winona limits. It came through us through annexation.
Pam?
Yeah, there is land available that may be sometime in the future annexed into Winona. I think that anything we do to protect ourselves against mines if we choose to do that, mines in the city limit should also extend to, it would also extend then to any future annexed land. So extending the residential buffer to 2,000 feet is a modest proposal. It certainly would prevent probably a lot of the little pieces that we saw on Carlos's map from being developed. But I'm looking a little further ahead than that.
I'm going to suggest that before we make any motions on any of these amendments, that we just that we go through the amendments and the council people have concerns, raise the concerns about the specific amendments, as we're doing here now about the mining ordinance. And then we may that may determine how we want to proceed with any motions. So are there any more comments?
I just have one more question.
Okay.
Carlos, is there any area in the city of Winona, excluding Bisons, that is currently zoned for mining or that can mine without coming to the council for a zoning change?
So potential mine locations are shown on this map right here. These locations are outside of the 1,000-foot existing setback. They're also outside of the Bluffland Impact Overlay District, and they're in the Ag zoning district. So our current zoning code right now allows mining in the Ag zoning district with a CUP. So they would have to come to the Board of Adjustment to get a conditional use permit before mining in any one of these areas right here.
Other questions concerning the mining ordinance?
Well, to continue that line of thought, the land that's right outside the city limits that is part of one of the orderly annexation future possibilities, that would come into the city under, as I understand it, an AG zoning, which does allow mining. So that's one of the reasons I'd like to see us close that loophole.
According to the comprehensive plan, any future land that is annexed into the city, according to the plan, it either gives it a low-density residential, a mixed residential, a business park, or a general mixed-use zoning classification. That would not align with the Ag zoning district. So if something were annexed, we take a look at the comprehensive plan, see what it says, and it does not indicate support for any kind of agricultural zoning in the city's potential future expansion.
Any other questions or concerns, comments about the mining ordinance? If not, let's talk about the second one, the amendment to the performance standards ordinance regarding moisture testing levels for sand stockpiles. Anybody want to bring anything up? Pam?
I would like to. I have been studying this quite a bit this last year, so I have a few things that alert me. And one tonight is that change from, I think we went from 4% moisture down to 1.5% moisture. And this I don't understand, why we jumped down to the bare minimum of what's allowed. It doesn't make me happy at all. I understand that to function, the machines, the sand processing machines have to have, it can't be just soaking wet. But isn't there something between 4% and 1.5% that would be a little damper and not so inclined to blow away? So I would certainly change it to 2.5% or 3%. However, that still doesn't get us out of the problem of having sunlight beat down on sand piles and wind blow across it, perhaps over the railroad cars or wherever else it's being stored. So the moisture, I believe that we have to have no storage of sand outside, out in the open. I think it has to be covered in some way to prevent sand and dust from escaping and blowing around. And this really is an important health issue. We talk about silica sand and the particles as though it were the same thing, and it's not. The fine particles that are of health concern are 2.5, where the sand measures, I think, 10. Okay, it's those tiny fibers that are a problem. Other cities have been working on this, and there's a lot of information out there to go read. On the Ire Range, mesothelioma cancers are 300 times more common than elsewhere. The search for the cause has led from asbestos, which they first suspected, to some kind of long fiber dust. And then finally, now they're turning to silica dust as being a possible, very much implicated in this phenomenon of mesothelioma cancers there. Okay, so we don't know. I'm not saying that that's, you know, all I can say is that we need to be very careful with this, and to take care with this health issue is certainly our job on the City Council. I would prefer that each facility would purchase an air quality monitor for both baseline and regular tests. Okay, I understand from talking to Dr. Crispin Pierce today that these cost something like $60,000 each, so it's no small price to pay. But on the other hand, in terms of our health risk, it is a small price to pay. And I think that just changing the moisture content to 1.5% and having it be stored outside is, in the face of this risk, is not the way to go. So that's main concern for me.
Michelle?
Carlos, maybe you can talk us through this a little bit. Are you saying the state standard for silica sand or frac sand is 1.5%? And I thought I understood that any new sand stockpiles would either be inside of a building, an enclosed building, or had to be covered as part of this ordinance or this plan, that they had to be covered to protect against wind blown. Because then I'm thinking, are we going to use the water to have them keep watering it down, or are we going to cover it? Because, I mean, water is another concern that has been brought up repeatedly about water use. And so, not that I object to it being moist, I just, how much water to make it moisture if we're going to have them inside of a building or covered?
The requirement for 1.5 to 3% moisture comes from a recommendation from the MPCA. According to the EPA, if sand is wet or moist during processing, the process emissions, the dust that's created, is negligible. So what staff did is talk to the MPCA and ask them what is a moisture content that would make that happen. And that moisture content level that was recommended is 1.5 to 3%. The existing CUP requirements that we have on in the city code for new processing and transportation facilities would require enclosure of any kind of processing equipment or stockpiles within 500 feet of a residential zoning district, residential or business zoning district. So that would require enclosure of the sand or any equipment that's used to process the sand. The current city code right now has regulation against dust. If dust blows off property lines, it's a violation not only of city code but also of state statute. So if a stockpile that is in the city right now is producing dust that floats across city lines, we can take corrective actions for that. One of those corrective actions is already stipulated in the city code, which says that any stockpile that produces wind-blown dust shall be covered. And so that's number one, you can do that. The second thing, when it comes to watering the stockpiles, what a number of other mining operations have done in western Wisconsin is they have a little mister basically at the end of the processing equipment that they have. They hook it up to water and it moistens that stockpile as the sand is off-put from the equipment. So that's one way that they keep the sand wet.
Well, I can guarantee you that anybody that's handled bulk commodities at 1.5% moisture in Minnesota, you've got one big chunk. It's frozen. You don't have to worry about it free-flowing because it won't free-flow in January at 1.5%. So it's going to freeze, period. Unless they have it in a building or unless they have it in some way with a temperature above that. And the whole purpose of having a moisture content in there is to stop dust-borne particles. Well, you don't have to worry about that in the wintertime, because you'll have one big chunk. And if it's a pile that's got 25,000 tons in it, it'll be a 25,000 ton chunk. Guaranteed. I've handled and crushed product in Duluth, and I can tell you, you can load a semi at the base of Duluth down at the port, and by the time you get to the top of the ridge, you have one 20-ton chunk.
That works for January. What about July?
Well, that's why the moisture helps, because the moisture does in fact keeps the dust.
Pam?
So am I understanding that all stockpiles will be covered?
That's a potential remedy that city staff could take in order to address any issues with sand blowing off of property lines. So an individual operation can produce dust within the confines of their property, but if right next door you're getting a film of dust in your car, and I can go over there and take my finger and go like this and see a bunch of dust, and I can identify that it's coming from an operation that is a violation of city code and state statute as well. So there are a number of remedies that are already in the code right now, and state statute says that an operation has to take every reasonable measure to control dust. So if it continues to be an issue, we can take further steps as well.
Jerry?
But that's not all places. That's all places that are going to stock, all new places that are going to stockpile within 500 feet of a residence. Is that correct?
If we get a new operation into the city that applies for a CUP, anything within 500 feet of a residential or commercial zoning district would require to be covered.
Right. Well, if we required it to be covered from the very beginning, because what I'm hearing tonight is it's going to happen. Eventually, they're going to be in violation. And then what happens is we're going to, and we already know that we don't have the staff or the funding to adequately test or enforce, but eventually we'll have somebody, we'll find them to be in violation. Then we're going to tell them you've got to either cover it or build a building, and they're going to say it's a financial hardship, but then we go through all that. Why not just put the financial investment up front? Because what we're hearing, and we know, it's going to happen. Dust is going to happen. So I agree with you on all three items. And the last one, not just waiting for the 500 feet, but saying all new ones, if they're going to stockpile, the stockpile must be covered.
Okay. Other comments regarding the Second Amendment? We'll go to the Third Amendment and discuss that briefly. Okay. The amendments to the existing sand conditional use permit ordinance establishing setback requirements from residential property. Council comments or concerns? Al?
Just a question on the definition of residential property. Does that define as the property line or the building itself? I guess I would ask staff their intent on this, and perhaps we can clarify what is meant by residential property if we need to.
So what we're looking at here is a map of a conceptual site, emphasis on conceptual, in the M2 zoning district adjacent to a residential zoning district. You have in the orange area houses in a residential zoning district. You have in this location right here houses that are in a M2 manufacturing zoning district. So it would be from the property to the setback line. So it would be from the property line to, that's where the required setback would be.
And that amount is in other ordinances that we have that relate to this conflict between M2 and residential areas?
The 200-foot requirement that's proposed is stated in other areas of the M2 zoning district. That's basically where I got it from. And so it's in line with other uses that were detailed in the memo to council. Those uses being junk or scrap yards, railroad yards and freight stations, breweries, and then storage or sales of grain, livestock, feed or fuel, other uses that are allowed in the M2 zoning district.
Has this been a part of our zoning code since it was implemented in 1960?
I'd have to check the exact dates, but I think a lot of those original setbacks continue to be true. So Yes.
I think times have changed since then, but I know we're going to be embarking on a comprehensive look at our zoning eventually, and perhaps that's something to be begun here with a greater separation between these districts if we have new ones that come in between now and then. I would offer at least a 500-foot separation in this case.
Other comments? Hearing none, we'll go to the Fourth Amendment, an ordinance establishing transportation impact analysis and road wear agreement requirements. Michelle.
Carlos, maybe you can help me with this. I believe that the city did a traffic study analysis or a road analysis years ago when the corn truck started coming, which is one of our bigger importers. Is that not true, that we looked at all of the truck routes and all of the traffic that came from, I don't know if you were here then. I just remember reading that. So I wonder if that was not looked at when we were looking at some of the road conditions you set up to help us kind of understand how we got to where we are with this part of the ordinance.
There's been a number of studies on transportation in the city of Winona. The recent one that I have in my office is from 1997, a study that was done by Bonestrow. There were a number of different things that study concluded, basically some improvements that needed to be made. None of them specifically mentioned traffic impact analyses or road use agreements. These proposals for amendments to the zoning code come directly from how other cities and counties are dealing with silica sand operations in southeast Minnesota and western Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Michelle? Sorry, Pam. I was thinking Michelle.
Okay, the traffic impact analysis seems to leave a whole lot to the discretion of the city engineer. And I don't know why. Why would we do that? Why would it be one person's discretion to decide on a traffic impact analysis? Let's see, I had the page marked. It says it's page 36, but that may not be quite right here. So, okay, so I would request that, one, I'd like to understand why it's left to the city engineer to decide whether there's a traffic impact analysis. I think the criteria should be clear. It shouldn't be left to just one person. I would say that we would require a traffic impact analysis whenever the amount of truck traffic is greater than 20% of the traffic on any little street where half the property is residential. I don't see why that would be at the discretion of the city engineer. 20% of the traffic coming past your house is truck traffic. That should automatically trigger, in my mind, that should trigger a traffic impact analysis. So that's my objection to that particular item. Could you talk to me about the city engineer part, though?
The requirement for the city engineer being kind of the final person that would determine the need and adequacy of a transportation impact analysis comes from other ordinances where this has been established. Basically, that office of the city has more expertise when it comes to transportation and when it comes to engineering. So they would offer their expertise in consulting, in this case, the Board of Adjustment that would receive a conditional use permit for a facility. Now, that's not to say that the Board of Adjustment, in granting the CUP, couldn't order a transportation impact analysis anyway. It's basically up to the board and the issuance of the CUP to make that decision. So what we do is we would consult with the city engineer to help us to look at the details to make sure that the report meets engineering requirements and that what they're actually putting in the report would sufficiently handle the increase in truck traffic.
Well,
I read this a little differently. This is the under 4389 general provision, paragraph A, that it seems that the thrust is that, you know, anything over 200, boom, it's automatic. But if you're in a residential area where 20% of the traffic happens to be commercial, then the city engineer can order a traffic impact study. So this kind of takes that 200 truck threshold down to a more reasonable and one that reflects neighborhood realities if you're in a residential area with less than 200 trucks. So I think it's a good part of this, and perhaps that's the place where it should stay.
Well, I think it's good too. It's just that it leaves it all in the hands of the city engineer. And why shouldn't it be just an automatic trigger like the other one?
No.
It would just be clearer. This to me just seems a little mushy. That's all.
So you'd like it to read more than 20% of the traffic
Yeah.
with residential? I don't know what that would mean in terms of, because we're talking about things that happen after first of this year, when this all is required.
Are we still we're in the CUP world right now, aren't we? Okay, so if the proposed facility is going to send trucks that amount to more than 20% of the traffic through one of our little neighborhoods, it's an automatic traffic impact analysis. I just think that that's reasonable. That's just the way I'm reading it.
Okay.
Other council concerns or comments? George?
In regards to the traffic that she's talking about, that truck would have to travel on a truck route, correct? As far as the frac sand industry, and I think we gotta, instead of just singling out the frac sand industry, we have many other trucking companies that also service this community. Are they all impacted by all of this as well? There's many, our society today, the way we live, in our retail markets and commercial industries, it generates a lot of truck traffic along with their manufacturing. But most of these trucks do travel on the truck routes, right?
Yes, the trucks are required to travel on the truck routes, and the amendments would apply to all trucks, period. So we're not just looking at silica sand operations, we're looking at all operations.
Which I believe those trucks follow now, except if they think they can go off, one block or 2 blocks to make a delivery if there is no truck route to that facility. But I say most of I know 3rd Street, Mankato Avenue, those are all truck routes. Main Street is a truck route. I believe West 5th is a truck route.
Gilmore and Sarnia.
Okay, Gilmore and so those are all truck routes, and which they have a right to ride on, so.
They are allowed to deviate off the truck routes in order to reach their destination.
Right.
Other comments or concerns? Jerry?
This is for anybody on staff who can maybe answer it. What happened with the county? I know the county tried, they were going to charge per mile. And that was, whatever happened with that? Did that even meet the legal smell test yet, or what's going on with it?
The county did implement a charge of 21 cents per ton per mile. That's what the county did. And in addition to that, they also have the requirement for a transportation impact analysis and road use agreement. But at the present time, that only applies to silica sand mines. It doesn't apply to any other uses.
No, I'm still thinking here on the fee portion. This has been brought up ever since the very beginning, and yes, I know we have other trucking firms and we're hauling a variety of commodities, and people can say it's unfair, but for tonight's discussion, the main issue is hauling all of this frac sand related material through the city of Winona. We also, another fact is it's going to take additional manpower to either whether we're going to test the air quality or monitor the traffic. And we have a difficult time covering the trucks now that creatively deviate from those truck routes. And then by the time that our law enforcement get to them, they're delivered and gone. That's been an ongoing issue in Winona. So, given the existing problems and the potential problems, is there any way that there would be some sharing of the cost with this particular industry. I know we've researched it in the past. This kind of covers all 4 items. But is there a way to do it? Before we say, oh, that's unfair, we do some industries and we don't do other industries. I mean, we did a liquor license, for instance, because we know that there's more administration time and also law enforcement. So is there a potential for that?
Judy, can you?
Mr. Councilmember, I believe that the tax that you're allowed to put on county roads is not allowed to be enacted by the city. I believe that's strictly a county available tax.
But how about, true, but that's what the county is doing, but I mean, the loading facilities and the things that will take place within our jurisdiction, is there an additional fee or a licensure or something along that line that we could legally look into? Or look into and potentially legally adopt?
That's actually what we're looking at with this road use agreement here, where, you know, if we got a new operation, what would happen is you would take a look at the truck route that's going to be used between the operation and the nearest truck route, and what it's proposed to do is do a study, and based on that study, we would institute a road use agreement, and that road use agreement would be part of the conditional use permit. Part of that road use agreement would be a financial instrument that would serve to ensure that the company is paying its fair share in upgrading the road as needed for the increased number of trucks that are going to be going on that road. So that's how we're approaching it through the transportation impact analysis and the road use agreement. It takes an operation that would come into the city. It analyzes how many trucks would use a specific route, and it determines what needs to be done in order to upgrade that route to handle that number of trucks.
Can we apply that to a state road? Or the exact?
The way we have it right now is it would go from an operation to a truck route. In terms of can we apply that to a state road, I'm not sure about that. I don't think the Department of Transportation, all of the state roads are built for trucks. And can we apply a transportation impact analysis to a state road? That's something that we could definitely let them know if that's part of their truck route, but then it would be up to them on whether they want to proceed with that analysis or any kind of improvements that they would want to make to the road.
Thanks. But I'd like to go beyond that if possible. That's covering, and as we did have that map a short time ago, it might be a block and a half, it might be something, but they got to travel a long ways before they get to that block and a half. Folks, a lot of what was brought up tonight, I'm in agreement with. Personally, I don't like to have frac sand be in our city at all. I made that clear many, many times. But if it's got to be here, let's control it and limit it as much as we possibly can. But we keep hearing this fact over and over again that the testing is going to be an issue, regardless of how high and low it's going to be testing. Traffic. Who's going to take care of this? How are we going to fund it? That is a constant across the board. I believe that's going to have to be answered before we go ahead and put this thing into place. I believe so. And is it possible? I think it's possible to have an answer to that. Either, yeah, here's some ideas that you can choose from, or, oh, heck no, that's not legal. I think we can get an answer with that within 30 days. That would help us. I'd hate to put something in place to say, well, in the future we're going to try to figure out how to enforce it. Well, then we may have missed the opportunity to try to get some fees from this. If it's going to be in the community, if they can't afford a fee, then they're going to lose money anyway, and they shouldn't be in business. If it is in fact going to have a negative impact, and it will, then they should pony up and be paying part of it. How can we get something? A reasonable fee, if in fact we can do that. And I don't think we're ready to give that answer tonight. Michelle?
Here's my problem, though, with what you're saying is, from my perspective, the majority of the sand and stuff that we're talking about is coming from somewhere outside of our city. We're talking about Wisconsin, we're talking about Wabasha, we're talking about Red Wing and St. Charles. Who knows where it's coming from? And that doesn't fit that criteria. I mean, it's all good and well for us to regulate here, but Minnesota City and Goodview, which are next door, are not doing anything. and probably won't. So from my perspective, I think instead of looking for a way just to penalize in town here, I think we take our imperfect, which I think we can all agree this ordinance is not perfect. But you have to start somewhere. We have to have something in place for when the moratorium's done. So when people come to us, we have a standard. And once we start using it, we can look at it and say, okay, right, maybe it wasn't good that just the city engineer does the impact statement. Maybe we do need to have an oversight there. But until we actually put it into effect or into action, how do we know? We don't know. And all I know is since most of the sand is not coming from here, what you're suggesting I don't think is actually going to benefit the city enough. So I'd rather look at ways we can make it as safe as possible for us here. And if that means starting here and building from here, looking at ways to work with the state, I'm hoping they're still going to do the EIS. We don't know. Then I'd like to adjust from there. But we have to have something in place. I don't want to go. It's been a year. We have to have something.
But we don't have to do it tonight. Now, in the event that they're bringing it from Wisconsin and they're driving straight on through to another place, very little we can do about that, provided that they have the truck covered and they're not breaking the speed limit. But if they are going to be unloading it within our jurisdiction, that is what I'm thinking of.
So you're talking about like processing plant.
Whatever they want to call them.
I think that, I think it would be ridiculous for us to try to attempt to charge on a state aid road where they're doing the maintenance and the upkeep. I think that's just beyond the scope of what even the statutes would allow. Now, if it's our road and we're paying for the maintenance and the upkeep, that's a different ballgame. But that's why you pay road tax, that's fuel tax, that's to use the state roads.
I agree, but I'm wondering if there's something even more that we can do. A per ton surcharge of some particular thing to help us. If we're going to partner with a particular industry that we know is going to be difficult to handle, some fee. And I know we've talked about the road tax, and I agree with you. It's going to be difficult or impossible on state roads. The county, that hasn't been tested yet. Hopefully it works for them. If it's going to be an extended from off a truck route 2 or 3 blocks to another, I like that plan. But we're going to need to get some fees out of this thing. In the event that this thing is successful for them and a headache for us, it's going to take money to handle it. In the event that it is not successful for them, then it's a moot point. But to try to think of fees after we agreed to something is too late. And it's also, to think of it from a business perspective, if we're going to require them later on, we'll think about maybe having them covered if it becomes a problem. No, let's talk about it now so anybody interested can make that investment or that planning up front. If there are going to be fees later on, let's discuss them right now or before we do this so people can make that business projection. I agree that we can make some adjustments later, but big adjustments like this, I think that we should look at now. And frankly, City Manager, we may find out that the answer is no, you can't do that. It's too complicated, and at least then we have the answer.
Now, I just have a question for you, Jerry. Are you referring strictly to the transportation issue here for additional fees, or are you implying that there may be other ways to get other fees?
Any way we can get it.
Okay.
Let me rephrase that. Any way that we could partner with them in sharing the cost.
And legally undertake it.
Of course. Well, that too.
Yes. That's certainly something we can explain.
And I didn't mean any way we can take it. That really wasn't appropriate, because that was a tongue-in-cheek thing, but again, I prefer it not to be in Winona, but if it's going to be coming through here as another commodity, a more problematic commodity, how do we legally partner with them financially in order to help cover the cost that it's going to take to enforce and maintain?
I think I understand where you're coming from, and we certainly can explore that and see what we can come up with. But please understand that the regulations that you're looking at here under the fourth ordinance applies to all businesses. So that it would not just be the frac sand business.
I know that,
So
but I also understand the main issue of the overall tonight is frac sand, and that's why I know it's related to all four, but not specific. All of this is going to cost money, anything related to frac. How do we try to get some costs
okay
covered?
I'm sure that if the city is creative enough to charge me for a rain tax, they can be creative enough to figure out a way to collect some type of tax.
Yep.
All right, well, we've discussed all four of the amendments. How would you like to proceed?
I have a couple of questions that are kind of outside the ordinances.
All right.
Okay, one is, what did ever happen to the Planning Commission's move to have a statewide GEIS? The Planning Commission agreed on that, and I think the council did too, and we sent it to the state, so what's up?
That request was put together in a resolution that was passed by council and forwarded to the state. It was confirmed by the DNR, the MPCA. It was confirmed by the state that they did receive it and enter it into the discussions that the state was having at frac sand at that time. I haven't heard anything about a determination for a GEIS, but that was followed up on and it did go to the state.
Sounds like a black hole. What's the process then on their part? What are they going to do with it?
It's in their hands.
Is the legislature then that's doing this, or DNR, or what?
It's in their hands right now. I received a confirmation from Bob Hatton at the EQB, that he did receive the resolution that was sent from council, and it was made part of the discussion that they had earlier on this year, or last year, about the frac sand industry.
Okay, thank you. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about the enforcement. That was an answer to some of the questions that came up last time. And so on the handout, or on the memorandum we got, there was a bit about enforcement. Is this an appropriate time to talk about that, or do we want to put that off until another time?
I think it's appropriate.
Okay. Okay, well, I think that the consequences as specified, the consequences for any infraction to whatever we come up with as our ordinances, the consequences seem very vague and unsatisfying. There are no consequences listed. It's kind of on a case-by-case basis. Monetary fines are mentioned as a kind of, for example, you know, if we're going to have if we're going to enact these ordinances and have any kind of enforcement, there has to be some kind of consequences. And in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me it has to be pretty clear what the consequences are going to be for blowing sand, or somebody, you know, or too many trucks, or whatever it would be. I just think we need to have a little clearer statement on the consequences.
Well, I had this discussion this afternoon with Mr. Hood, and I think he's probably best equipped to answer this question.
Mayor and Council, enforcement of code violations is always difficult, and it's always fact-specific. There are many, 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 many possibilities for different violations. Some very minor, some less minor, and some that could be particularly serious. Enforcement is difficult. We've been involved in a lot of enforcement matters over the years. Some of the most difficult ones are individual property owners who just simply won't comply. And it takes a fair amount of effort to try and, because we can't just put the hammer down on people for a code violation right away. We need to give them an opportunity to try and voluntarily comply. That may involve penalties or fines initially. If we don't get compliance from initial efforts, it may be ratcheted up to criminal penalties, which under the city's code would be a misdemeanor. Every day in which a violation continues beyond the point of citation is an additional misdemeanor for each day. It's penalized by up to $1,000 fine. We don't particularly like to file criminal charges in those types of situations. We prefer to try and deal with it through a civil process. and penalties. We have had, in some cases, bad actors where we have had to fine. Oftentimes when we get into more serious problems or bad actors, it involves more monetary penalties and usually involves the other party hiring legal counsel on the other side, and then legal counsel for the city and legal counsel for the defendant, then try to work out things. It all costs money. I understand that there's frustration and it's not very satisfying, but that's the reality. And anybody that works in local government knows that enforcement issues are always the most difficult. We do have options for bad actors. We can take civil action to enjoin action of a party that is violating. We have other options for particularly bad actors. Let's say with a conditional use permit, we can seek to revoke the conditional use permit, just like we can seek to revoke licensure for example, liquor license violations. Again, those are not things that we do lightly because these are people's livelihoods. And in order to do it involves both notice and hearing in order to afford those parties due process. None of those processes are easy, but from a city standpoint, we have to have, because of the myriad of factual circumstances, we have to have some flexibility in the way that we are able to move forward with enforcement, which is part of the reason why that discussion in your packets is what you, I guess, would refer to as somewhat nebulous.
Thank you. George?
Carlos, then what's our final position on the air quality? It's been kind of been bounced back and forth, but what is our final resolution with that?
What we're saying with the proposed amendment is if you keep the sand wet, it's not going to produce dust. So you're nipping the problem in the bud. You're being proactive about a potential issue. The EPA has said that if you keep it wet, it will not produce dust. And not only the EPA, I've also talked with other industry experts, referenced other academic studies. If you keep it wet, it will not produce dust. And that's why we're recommending it.
And then just one more comment I want to make was brought up about diesel fuel and, you know, the soot and the smoke coming out of the trucks, which, you know, I work with trucks every day. I work with about 60 of them a day. And yes, some do smoke, but I think the fuel of the future, as we already know, there's two major vendors within our community that are going over to it, is compressed natural gas now. And I had an opportunity with a truck that came at where I work, and we went out, and he had it running. There was no rattle. He accelerated. There was no black smoke. So you're going to continue to see more and more of these vehicles get switched over to compressed natural gas. More expensive, but it's a lot cleaner for the environment. We'll be seeing more and more of that.
And they'll be using fraction sand.
Other comments? Questions for staff? Well, we've talked about all four of the amendments, and a lot of concerns have been raised, a lot of suggestions. I guess I'd like to ask the council what you'd like to do. You want to look at these again individually see if there's a motion? Do you want to, somebody else want to make a motion?
I would make a motion, with your permission, Mr. Mayor, to, let's see how to put this, to send all four items back to staff and to have staff rewrite them given the input around our table tonight and bring them back at the earliest possible regular council meeting, which would be in February, I believe.
February 4th?
Yes. And that would be my motion.
Okay, so there's a motion by Al to send this back to staff to rewrite the ordinance incorporating the comments and suggestions that were made here tonight.
Correct.
Is that correct?
I would second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Further discussion. Michelle?
I think a few.
Oh, I think we should hear from Mr.
Sorry.
Hood.
Since I'm going to be part of the staff that's going to be rewriting this, I have to ask the question of council, because I've heard
Maybe you could stand at the mic.
As I was saying, I've heard comments from council tonight, and as staff, Carlos and I would be called upon to draft or rewrite the ordinances. I've certainly heard suggestions from individual council members about directions that they would like to see these go. I haven't seen any motions from council about whether that is actually the position of the council. For example, going from 1,000 to 2,000 setback. It seems to me if that's the direction that council wants to go, then council should make those motions here tonight directing staff to go back and make those changes. Because those are very specific, and you did talk about those, but the body did not say that that was the position that they wanted to take.
I think it's a good suggestion.
That was going to be my comment, is that some of these modifications are such that we could easily do it, make a motion, vote, and get that one off the table. And that would be what I would prefer, instead of, I guess we're not even suggesting tabling, we're not giving direction at all. So I guess I'd rather start over and
And I would say that if somebody has a particular change that they want in one of these, that they simply amend it and submit it as an amendment to the motions. And then let's get on with the business.
Okay, well, we have a motion and a second on the floor here we need to deal with. So, why don't we do that? Any further discussion about the motion made by Al, seconded by Pam?
Do we want to entertain any amendments at this time to that motion? And then vote on the main motion once all those amendments are entered?
Could we now, at this point, agree that we're going to return it to staff, but we will now proceed and direct staff what the changes should be?
As amendments to the motion, yeah. And vote on each of those amendments as a collective council, and then turn it over to staff.
Tonight you have 4 ordinances before you. There's nothing to prevent you from taking up each ordinance, amending the ordinance tonight, making a motion to amend ordinance number 1 related to the setback. You could take that action tonight. You also could take a different approach, which would be, you know, should we change the setback requirement? Motion to change the setback requirement, directing staff to make the change and bringing us back the ordinance. But for, like Councilor Double stated, you could make those changes to the ordinance tonight if that was what you wanted to do.
What do we do with the motion?
Well,
if
you
we
could
made?
withdraw the motion if you wanted to. If it make it clearer that we don't want to pass, at least my intention was not to pass the sections tonight without hearing from staff, given the amendments that were talked about. So I'm not ready to pass each amendment without making changes and then hearing from staff on those changes, because, you know, we are trying to do the best in modifying these, and the staff, I'm sure, would have some input. So therefore, I would withdraw my motion, and then someone can make, if the second agrees, and then we can make individual motions to send those individual motions with specific requests for staff input moving forward.
Does the second agree?
I believe so.
Okay. Then to move the process along, then I would move that we approve action item number 1 as amended by, as recommended by staff.
I'd second that.
So there's a motion to approve amendment number 1 and seconded by Michelle as amended by staff.
No, as presented.
As presented.
As presented in the packet.
So at what point do I suggest an amendment?
Right now.
You got it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, I would suggest that we change the residential buffer figure from 1,000 feet to 2,000 feet.
I'll second that amendment.
There's a motion and a second to amend, sorry.
Did you further want to amend the time?
Exactly, thank you. Thank you, yes. Change the hours of operations as listed here, 6 to 10 p.m., back to 6 to 9 p.m., which it was before.
I agree with that. Okay, so there's a motion and a second to amend the motion to 2,000 foot setback and the hours of operations from 10 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Okay. Other discussion on this amendment? Amendment? No? Okay, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pardon?
This
is on the amendment.
Just on the amendment.
Everybody voted aye? Okay.
Aye.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, that passes.
Now we vote on,
Any further amendments? Just to be clear. Okay, now we'll vote on the motion, which the clerk will state.
The motion is to introduce the ordinance number 1 regarding mining with the amendments offered by Councilwoman Iden.
All right, any further discussion?
Again, this is introduction of the ordinance.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Passes. All right. Amendment number 2.
I recommend amendment number 2 as presented by staff.
I'll second.
Motion by Paul, second by Michelle.
I would like to amend that. I'd like to change the 1.5% to 2.5% and also specify, I don't know if it already is, I'm still a little confused by this, but specify that all sand piles be covered in some way to prevent sand from blowing around.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Pam, a second by Jerry.
Clarification on that, before they were talking about in the event that there was concerns, is your amendment to say all of them from this point forward will be covered? Not waiting for a complaint, they're going to be covered
Yes.
before operation starts?
Yes, definitely.
Any further discussion?
Not on those two.
Okay. George?
well, we'll be voting on those two separately, because I'm for covering the piles, but I'm not for the 1.5. I'm for the 1.5.
They need amended.
I'm for the 1.5, and I'm for covering the piles, so I'm against,
Okay. So maybe we should take them as separate amendments then.
that's,
So you would need to withdraw your motion to
I
amend.
will withdraw that. And my new amendment is to change the moisture content from 1.5% to 2.5%.
Any second on that?
Sure.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, Pam and Jerry, on raising the moisture content from 1.5 to 2.5%. Any further discussion? All those in favor of this amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
2 in opposition.
Can they, 3?
3? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had said you were in favor of the moisture content part.
Or the lower one.
No.
yeah, I was for the 1.5.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So the 3 against are,
Paul, George.
okay.
George, Paul, and Michelle?
Thank you.
I vote in favor. Motion carried.
And my second amendment, please, is to specify that all sand piles outside be covered in some way to prevent sand and dust from escaping and blowing around.
Second.
Excuse me?
I think we should hear from Mr. Hood.
I just wanted to point out that in the ordinance that you are looking at right now, it does say that all activities shall comply with applicable state law, rules, and local ordinance for dust and particulate matter generation in any stockpiles, including sand and dirt, which should be produced, wind-blown dust, shall be covered. Does that not address your issue?
Was that not the case then when the Big Mount frac was sitting down here on the riverfront? That was still a state law at that time too, right? And that didn't seem to impel them to cover it?
That one was covered actually, and if it were producing wind-blown dust, then we could have required it to be covered. It was not producing wind-blown dust. That pile was not producing wind-blown dust. The issues that we were having with dust from that not from that pile, but from that operation were because of the trucks that were moving through the operation and dragging out debris, and we remedied that issue with the operator. So the issues that were happening on 2nd Street with sand and debris on cars and on the car dealership were remedied by putting tracking pads on site and also paving the truck maneuvering areas. There was not sand blowing off of that pile onto adjacent properties. If there were, we could have required it to be covered.
Well, okay, speaking personally, I saw that it was blowing off. So this is, you know, I know what I saw, and the sand was blowing off. That was that phase. This is now. I'm not trying to return to that, but I think all open sand piles, given the danger of silica dust, all open sand piles should be covered up. So that's my amendment, please.
And I'll second that, but if the city attorney says it's already in there, I guess we're okay, but I think in the discussion it was only after it becomes a problem will they be required to be covered, and we'd like them to be covered from the very beginning.
I guess a point of clarification too, are you talking about enclosing every sand pile with a structure, or are we talking about a tarp? The reason why a lot of sand piles are not covered right now is because they're constantly being moved. Every day people are using them, they're utilizing them. And with those sand piles, if they have a moisture content of 1.5, 2.5%, or 3%, you're not going to get that dust being produced. So I need some clarification as to whether you're looking at enclosure with the structure. So all sand piles in the city, are we just talking about frac sand piles? Are we talking about other types of sand piles? If we're going to require it for sand piles, are we also talking about dirt? Does that all need to be covered? Are we also talking about sand? Are we talking about stockpiles? I'm sorry, salt? Are we talking about stockpiles, period?
I think
or is it just frac sand?
It's be frac sand.
Okay.
Paul? I will recluse myself on this particular one, but as a person who has multiple patents on covering commodities, okay, I would simply say that if you're going to get that specific and not give the latitude with the city to be an enforcing officer, then you get into issues of having to fine tune it and say done on a weekly basis, done on a monthly basis, because part of the process of building a stockpile is that you need to push up to the top of the pile. So it needs to have a reasonable working face, and the same goes when you reclaim the pile, is to have a reasonable working face. And you just need to make sure that there is some latitude to say that the building process and the reclaim process of that pile needs to be within reason.
This is what I'm thinking you're saying, just help me out here. I was originally in favor of the covering, but what you're saying is if they're actually working with the pile and they're moving it, to recover it after every load would be ridiculous. Okay, so how would we deal with that? If they're moving their pile or loading their pile and it takes them the day or 2 days to do it, and I know how tedious it is to get the tarps up on top of those salt piles. So how do they deal with that then? Because if we tell them that must always be covered, then what's the enforcement there?
I don't know. It sounds like we're throwing our hands up stating, well, because they have a business to do and they have to, and I certainly get what you're getting at. I don't know what the easy answer is, but to do nothing is just to wait for complaints to happen, and then to have some people, whether it's legit or not, believe it's happening, others telling you it doesn't happen, and both sides maybe believing that they're right. You create a potential problem, what we're dealing with tonight, and that's why I don't like to have this ticking clock saying we have to do something tonight. because this is a good example of something that we may not be prepared to deal with tonight.
Because I guess from my perspective, I'd rather have some parameters than if they're actually working with moving the pile, it's understandable that it's not covered. But if they're not, if it's just stockpiled, fine, it should be covered. But there has to be some understanding for the business on what they fit inside of those parameters. I mean, we have to tell them what that would be.
Part of me says it'd be great to have a big building, but then you're going to have these massive unsightly buildings, especially in some of these places where when they're not operating, they still have a great view. I don't want to go that far. I don't know what the answer is. I don't like to, though, wait what we're talking about now, wait for a problem to happen, and then it's who's deciding it's a problem. We already know by history that doesn't work. So to improve on the problem we had this last year, I guess, is what I'm looking for.
You could put in there that when, that it must be covered within a period of time, and we could set it at 20 days, 30 days, from the time that stockpiling has ceased.
How about 2 days? 2 days. I don't know. See, I don't know enough about the business. I don't mean to be, as somebody said, I don't mean to be ridiculous in this. And this is where perhaps we need to ask staff to take this back and find a way to get those, see what the best way would be to cover the stockpiles and prevent the wind and the drying. On these hot summer days, if there's a drought, it's going to be drying out pretty fast. Perhaps we can send this back to staff.
Yes. Yes, please.
You've made one amendment to ordinance number 2 at this point. You could give ordinance number 2 first reading as you've currently amended it to deal with the moisture issue, and then direct staff over the next 2 weeks between first and second reading, then to come back with a recommendation on what council is discussing.
I think that makes sense, because I think there are issues here that we need to have answers to. So we need to vote on the amendment, the motion as it was stated.
Unless there's more discussion on any other items.
Okay. Well, I meant on the amendment. That we have a motion and a second on that. Do we need to vote on that? I think so.
Well, we have a motion on the table, and then we have one amendment that passed. The second amendment is the one for discussion with this motion and a second. But that's the one we may withdraw and then send back as a direction to council or to administration. Is that what I'm hearing, City Attorney?
That's nice.
We would withdraw that, and then, but that is a strong direction for administration of what to come back with.
Yes, okay. And I guess what I was recommending was that you give first reading to this ordinance as you've amended it with 2.5%, and then we would come back at your next meeting with a recommendation for additional language with this ordinance on this second reading that we're discussing.
Is that
It seems reasonable, but just educate me. What does it mean when you say give this a first reading? What do you mean by that?
All ordinances need 2 readings in order to pass. So each ordinance at a separate meeting gets reading, which means the council makes a motion to technically give it first reading.
Thank you. Okay. Well, then I can.
So are you withdrawing your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you in agreement? So it's just withdrawn. All right, any other?
Yes, I got a question for Councilwoman Iden. You had mentioned a third thing, although it was rather expensive, but a dust monitoring device.
Yes.
Now that was the extremely expensive one, but it wouldn't be a bad idea, I would assume, that some locations will monitor their dust and others won't before we come in and monitor them. I would like to have staff also come back with some ideas. 65,000 is incredibly high, but an agreeable or a agreed on by state monitoring system that they all are required to have some tool to do their own monitoring. it's on an honor system, but still, some of them will, I mean, I think that instead of wishing that they're going to have a system, we would require them to have a system, but I don't know, we don't know enough about the systems other than the one that you had mentioned, a potential cost of $65K. That may be a bit steep, but if administration could also look at something like that, are there more reasonable ones that the state says kind of works?
So that would then be part of this ordinance?
Something for them to look at, because those were the 3 items that you had brought up that
Right.
and that's also one I don't think we're ready to vote on tonight because we don't have enough information on what the monitoring system may cost.
I have a question about that.
Okay, Michelle?
Does this apply to every business in a manufacturing district then, or is this only to the sand facilities? Because I'm looking at what we're actually looking at, and this is just the, wait, maybe I'm on the wrong one. Performance standards.
Action item number 2 was written to apply to any business in the city because you have to recognize that issues with dust and particulates blowing off of stockpiles is not just an issue with frac sand, it's also an issue with any stockpile that's out there. So this would apply to any operation. So what we're saying here is that moisture testing may be required to ensure that sand is above 1.5%. So what we would do is go to the frac sand operations in town and have them submit records to us showing that certain moisture content threshold is being satisfied.
So really, we're talking sand tonight, frac sand, but this really applies to everything inside city limits. So if we ask for air monitoring, that's going to apply to every business that moves in, or is it only for sand, the sand facility?
Unless it's specified just for sand,
Okay.
it would apply because it's in the performance standards, and the performance standards apply to every business in the city.
So if we pass we want to make sure we either specify specific, okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Point of information, are we simply asking for a testing mechanism for moisture or a testing mechanism for air, or both?
I'd like some suggestions from administration to come back with that.
For both?
For both. I think it'd be a good idea. And if there's an affordable one out there, it's not a bad idea to say, hey, if you're going to be in this, operating with this commodity, we'd like you to have this.
Moisture is easy, and,
yes.
and the testing equipment to do that is relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
I understood from the conversation I had today with Dr. Crispin Pierce, whose students did come to Winona and do a little snapshot air quality test. I understood from him that from his point of view, he believes that as we move on, all of these facilities will be required to monitor their own air quality. So this might seem kind of unreasonable right now, but it may not be, considering the number of mines and the number of processing plants and the increasing risk to our health. So.
And in the event that we do adopt it, it's again a good idea for any potential business owner to know so they can future plan on what that expense is going to be.
I wonder if there's any way that they can share equipment.
That's what we were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
They could even contract.
Yeah.
All right, well, staff can come back and you can look at that and come back to us.
There's still a motion on the floor for ordinance number 2 as amended.
Any other,
Could I get a reading of what it is we've amended? Did we amend that to a higher moisture content?
Yes.
well, that passed.
2.5, yeah.
Yep. You want to read the original motion?
Well, the motion is to introduce the ordinance number 2 on the performance standards. The amendment was to change the moisture levels to 2.5%.
And then we had some suggestions for staff to come back.
Direction to staff for more research.
Are we ready to vote on the original motion? Yes? Okay. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passed. All right, we'll go to the third amendment. The existing sand conditional use permit ordinance establishing setback requirements from residential property. I'll move the motion as motion by staff. Motion by Paul, seconded by Michelle.
I'd like to offer an amendment to the motion that the minimum setback change from 200 to 500 feet under the new language to be introduced.
Second. I would second that.
Second by Jerry.
Pam can have that.
Pam, I guess Jerry says you can have it. We'll let Monica decide. All right, there's a motion and a second. Discussion.
Well, I think that's just reasonable, considering that we've altered the other setbacks. As a matter of fact, the other ordinance, as they were written, had already altered the setbacks. So this brings this kind of up to the same level.
Other comments? George?
If there's any at all that are already complying with 200 foot, are they all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other discussion? We'll move to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Motion passed. Now on the original motion, you want to read it?
This is to introduce the ordinance number 3 on setback requirements with the amendment to a minimum of 500 feet from a residential property.
Any discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Number 4, an ordinance establishing transportation impact analysis and roadware agreement requirements.
I move action item number 4 is recommended by staff.
Moved by Paul, seconded by Michelle. Jerry.
I don't have anything, but before we vote on this one, then we're done with this issue for a while, if I could just say something. And this was actually brought up by a gentleman in the audience when he called, talked to me a couple days ago, and it makes a lot of sense. And it was also brought up earlier this evening by somebody else who said, it appears at times there's been a gulf between staff and concerned citizens. And we've all seen that. I think one thing we have to walk away from all of this, well, not walk away because this is going to be an ongoing thing, but we're a small community and we are a community, and when we disagree on things, it's not personal. So a lot of people have become, this is a very passionate issue, and if you disagree with my side, obviously you've got a problem with me, but we know if we peel that back, that's not the truth. So as long as we keep remembering that, it's not personal. It's we may disagree on some issues.
It's well said. Any other discussion? We'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
1. That motion carries. Well, thank you. We completed the first of the 2 public hearings. Let me get my notes here. Why don't we recess for 4 minutes? How's that? Should be long enough.